مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أدى الكونغرس بعد عطلة صيفية طويلة، وفي حين أن بقيت البلاد قد لا تلاحظ، فإن لعودة 435 عضو من أعضاء الكونغرس و100 سناتور تأثير هائل على سير الحياة في واشنطن. فالشوارع أكثر ازدحاما، والمطاعم أكثر انشغالا، والصحف يمكن أن تعود مجددا للكتابة عن موضوعها المفضل، العراقية التشريعية. فالديمقراطيون والجمهوريون سيتصارعون حول كل شيء، بداية من كيفية هزيمة داعش وصولا إلى القرار بشأن إيقاف تمويل Planned Parenthood، أحد أكبر مقدمي الخدمات الخاصة للصحة النسائية والعمليات الإجهاض. والأهم من ذلك، سيعمل الحزبان على إخراج النقاط قبل الانتخابات الرئاسية، والتي بدأت بالفعل تسيطر على الأجواء السياسية الأمريكية، برغم من أنه يفصلنا عنها ما يزيد عن عام. لمناقشة الموسم السياسي الجديد في واشنطن، من المعارك في الكونغرس إلى الحملة الرئاسية، يسرني أن أرحب بعودة لجنتنا المكونة من الخبيرين السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وستيف كليمنز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here with our panel of political experts to discuss Congress. Congress is back from its summer recess. I'm not sure whether America is thankful for that or not, but we're going to discuss what Congress is about to do. So Norm, can you set the stage for us? Congress is back. So what?
Congress has a huge agenda and a very limited amount of time in which to do it, Rob. So to start with, we have a new fiscal year that begins October 1. That means all of the spending to keep government running has to occur before October 1. There are 12 bills to do that. Not a single one has passed through Congress. They have 10 working days in September. They're not going to be able to do it. So they're going to have to find a way to keep the government operating, or it will come to a halt as of October 1. Along with that, we have the debt ceiling coming up again. Probably sometime in October. It might be pushed to November or December. If you don't extend the debt ceiling with a vote in Congress, then America's credit goes down the tubes and we have another financial crisis. We have a highway bill, the fundamental infrastructure in the country, where Congress has been unable to agree on a funding resolution for that. That's the tip of the iceberg of the items remaining for this Congress, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to accomplish very much of any of them, and we may have a serious crisis over keeping the government operating or keeping America's fiscal standing in the world intact.
So, Steve, on that happy note,
cheery note,
let's focus on one item to start, which is the votes on the Iran nuclear agreement.
This is not going away, not in this session, not in the next session of Congress. This is going to be with us for a very long time. You're going to have something that comes up in a few months in Iran called Implementation Day, in which they have done most of the things or all of the things that require the release of the sanctions. And at that point, you're going to start a new set of eyeballs looking at Iran's behavior, Iran's compliance, and then as money begins to flow, what Iran does with those, what kind of choices. And we'll be able to see whether people like Senator Tom Cotton, who think that this was rotten from the beginning, are right, or whether those that have been supportive of the deal and see Iran's behavior potentially shift in new compliant directions. So within a year, we're going to be able to see either a change in course for Iran or not. That will level out who the winners and losers were in this politically.
And do either of you see any lingering effects of of how deep the divide was between both within the Democratic Party and in some senses, and between Republicans and Democrats on this issue?
I don't think between Republicans and Democrats. I do think it's going to be tough for a while, and Norm may disagree, for Chuck Schumer. You know, I think that battle for who heads Democratic leadership in the United States Senate in the future, that this will look as a trip up by Chuck Schumer by many, and it's going to be uncomfortable, even if he comes out and ultimately succeeds Harry Reid as the Democratic leader in the United States Senate. And I think when you saw Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, go through, I mean, she essentially has the identical profile in many ways of Chuck Schumer, and she came out in favor of the deal in a struggle, but nonetheless highly logical. I think that is going to be the reverberations of this within the Democratic Party are going to be much stronger than between the two parties.
You know, it was interesting. Perversely, Schumer, who came out against the deal pretty early on, took intense criticism from the left of the Democratic Party. MoveOn.org, an important organization on the left, got very aggressive, and what that did probably was to make it much easier for Democrats to vote for the deal. And where this will have repercussions, I think, is, as we've seen before, the American Jewish community has been divided on this. But what's happened is that Israel, for the first time, became a more partisan issue. And a lot of Democrats who faced intense pressure, millions of dollars in campaign commercials against them in their states or districts, telling them to vote against the deal, did an assessment and basically said, you know, if I vote against this, I might get a primary challenge on the left, which is the only thing that can hurt me in a safe district. And my Jewish community is going to be divided anyhow, so it made it easier for them to vote for the deal, where the conventional wisdom was you can't do something like this when you have this intense opposition. And we're going to see reverberations from that, including a deep resentment over the way some of the actors in this process lobbied so aggressively against it, including, of course, against Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose visit and speech to Congress became a highly partisan issue, that are not going away anytime soon.
And just to tie this in a bow, when all is said and done, do you expect magnanimity in victory or a bit of rubbing it in?
We're going into an election. There'll be a lot of rubbing it in on all fronts. There'll be loyalty tests applied to people in all forms. There's going to be nothing warm and fuzzy or nice or magnanimous as we go into the next year.
You know, the president is going to need to try and get his Democrats at least together and get Republicans, the more responsible ones, and that includes the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, to say, now, this is over. We lost, but let's make sure we implement this deal fully. Where Steve is right on target is we have a presidential campaign, and the vast majority of Republican presidential candidates have said, elect me, and the first thing I'm going to do is completely negate this deal.
Rip up the deal.
Now you have a few others who are saying, that's impossible, we can't do that. Elect me, and I'll make sure that it's really, really tough, and that we will come down hard on the Iranians if there's even the slightest variation from this deal going forward.
It must be very interesting for the President of the United States to realize that in the GOP lineup, Donald Trump is the one that's most faithful to the Iran deal.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk a bit about our presidential election with our panel of experts in just a moment. Again, my panel of political experts includes Steve Clemens. Sitting to his right is Norm Ornstein. So, gentlemen, before we go to the presidential election, our economy is doing fairly well. Unemployment is down to near 5%, but there are still things for Republicans and Democrats to argue about. You mentioned some of them earlier, the budget bills, et cetera. I did want to just have you explain one thing that popped up in recent weeks, and that is a political fight over something called Planned Parenthood. What is Planned Parenthood, and why is Congress fighting about it?
Planned Parenthood was a program initiated a long time ago with lots of Republicans and Democrats, people worried about giving women control over their futures, which meant whether they gave birth or not, and they became the largest supporters of birth control means and mechanisms. It's very interesting that President Bush's grandfather was one of the first treasurers of Planned Parenthood. And now to see the GOP in large part come out so much against Planned Parenthood and its activities and its funding has been very interesting, because it's a real walk away from the concern that many conservatives had in the country that young women were forced into lives that they didn't have any control over.
So what is this fight all about?
Well, Planned Parenthood has become an organization that not only deals with birth control, it performs a small number of abortions,
Right.
but it's also become a large purveyor of women's health. It does, in lots of places in the country, the only place where they can get screenings for cervical cancer or other kinds of health information or operations. A conservative hitman, basically, somebody who does videos and then doctors them to show things in the worst light, got a group of people to meet with Planned Parenthood officials. They take some of the fetuses that flow from abortions and use them for fetal tissue research, which happens to be something that of long standing has had important breakthroughs in, for example, the polio vaccine flowed from fetal tissue research. But getting the fetuses and getting them to researchers means you have to sell them, transport them. And while Planned Parenthood does this at cost, the videos suggested that they were fairly openly and in a relaxed fashion talking about selling the tissue from aborted babies. Created a firestorm in a country where the anti-abortion movement is very strong. Now the implications are much broader, because a substantial number of Republicans, including presidential candidates, have said we will not vote for any spending bill that provides any funding for Planned Parenthood. They get several $100 million a year in federal support. And that itself could mean a shutdown of the government.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to mention because of the huge political implications. Now, you mentioned presidential candidates. Let's turn to that for a moment. Of course, the big surprises so far, as we've mentioned before, are two names who came out of nowhere, Donald Trump on the right, Bernie Sanders on the left. But rather than talk about them, let's talk about the people who, whose spots they are usurping. Hillary Clinton and the leaders of the Republican Party in the centrist mold, say Jeb Bush. What are they doing to try to stop this tide for candidates on the far left and far right?
Well, right now they're trying to, Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush are trying to sort of out-reason them, or to sort of, come out with intellectually sound arguments that would deal with this tsunami of interest. I mean, one of the things I would take you on in your description of the economy is that the economy is going gangbusters. There are 1 million less high-paying jobs in this economy than there were before 2008. So while the aggregate number of jobs are higher, the quality of those jobs, the pay for those jobs is lower. And it explains a lot of what's happening behind Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, that you've got sort of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, that you've got people behind Bernie Sanders who look at this as the politics of inequality and the dominance of the U.S. economic system by large corporations that are out to essentially screw the middle class. All of that is part of that. Part of what's supporting Donald Trump are the old, angry, white working class Democrats who came to support Ronald Reagan. It's a pugnacious anger at the way the system has been stacked. So those two currents are very strong in the candidacies of both of those people. And I think when you look at Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, you ask, what are they doing to stop it? Hillary Clinton vacationing in the Hamptons at $100,000 a month vacation spot and swilling. I mean, I know Norm Ornstein thinks, she's beefing up on her fundraising, but it just plays wrong to people who are really struggling. And on the Jeb Bush side, I'll never forget when the governor of Texas, Ann Richard, was basically helping Bill Clinton at that time and campaigning for him, and said to George H.W. Bush, the last President Bush's father, that he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So this politics of inequality is a very, very big theme that I think we're going to see continue to play out at this. And I think Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton are failing to respond in large part to that.
Actually, what Ann Richards said was that George W. Bush had been born with a silver foot in his mouth. But there's something that's important that unites these two, and then something that is a distinction. It's a populism that always emerges in America whenever we've had difficult economic times. It flared after the economic collapse in 2008 under George W. Bush, when we got the bailout of the big financial interests, and a lot of Americans, left and right, were enraged. that the miscreants who caused this problem got away with it and indeed got bonuses while a lot of people lost their houses or saw their savings disappear. That's out there, and that certainly was the Occupy Wall Street movement on the left, and that's the support for Bernie Sanders. It was the Tea Party movement on the right that disdains its own party's establishment and leaders, and that explains not just Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, Carly Fiorina, outsiders. Now the difference is that Hillary Clinton still has support from the overwhelming majority of Democrats, is a clear front runner, and Bernie Sanders is not attacking her, he's just expressing his policy views. On the Republican side, it's a pitched battle. Donald Trump is going after Jeb Bush, hammer and tong, but Jeb Bush has now support in national polls of 6% of Republicans. The front runner, everybody assumed, would have 6%. The pundits thought that Donald Trump's ceiling was 20 or 25%, and at the time that he emerged, more than 2/3 of Republicans disapproved of him. Now 2/3 approve of him, and he's leading by wider margins. So what we would normally think, this is a summer fling, just isn't going to work that way.
But before we still hand the nomination to Hillary Clinton, so can this Goliath really lose both Iowa and New Hampshire and not be severely dented and almost invite Joe Biden into the race?
Well, I mean, this is where Norm and I are going to have a friendly disagreement, I think. I think the juggernaut of Hillary Clinton, which we saw play out and lose in 2008, is going through many of the similar sort of revisions of history, where it is also looking like a juggernaut, also looking like there's no other choice but Hillary. But in fact, if she stumbles in those early races, and though she'll then end up in the South with a lot of African-American voters and other ethnic voters that will play a bigger role, it does open up the thing that maybe she's the wrong person to lead the party. And I think that's got to affect Joe Biden's calculations.
My feeling is that Joe Biden's calculations are going to be driven far more by his family than by anything else. And Biden, remember, who ran for president twice and did not do well either time, flamed out at an early stage, has to know that getting into this, unless Hillary Clinton completely collapses because of scandal, that it's a problematic operation for him in terms of winning a nomination.
What's your hunch?
My hunch is that he will not run. I think, you know, this is a man who has been deeply scarred by horrible family tragedies. And I know something about that. It is very hard to recover, and to run for president, you have to throw yourself, and your family has to be completely engaged in this. It's very hard to do. He lost a son after having lost a wife and daughter many years ago. I'm skeptical that he will run unless, I think he's out there in case Hillary Clinton completely collapses. Right now, I would put the odds of her winning a nomination at well over 80%. In 2008, Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, made it very clear early on that he was going to favor Barack Obama. There was a division among the major funders and among the party leaders over which candidate they would support. Now there isn't. Bernie Sanders is getting a lot of enthusiasm and attention, but it's almost all among white liberal activists who are not going to be the dominant forces once you move past two early, very homogeneous small states, Iowa and New Hampshire. Lots of Democratic candidates and Republican candidates have lost a number of states along the way. That's typical. Al Gore lost several states to Bill Bradley. We had Jerry Brown in the past as a candidate who was a spoiler, even in late contests. Walter Mondale lost New Hampshire overwhelmingly to Bill Bradley. To Gary Hart. Those things are stumbles. She's still more likely to win. You know, Donald Trump still has to remain a bit of a dark horse, but a Republican establishment that has a huge group of Republicans and conservatives who don't trust it at all, who are going to grow even angrier as leaders like Mitch McConnell and the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, defy them by keeping the government open, for example, spending more money on highways or on domestic programs. Don't give them their victory in defunding Planned Parenthood, are going to turn more and more to these outsider candidates. It may not be Trump, it could be Cruz, it could be Carson.
I would just say on Joe Biden, just real short, is that while I don't know how he'll vote, I do know that many in the sort of Biden close camp see Hillary Clinton as someone who's impressive but bland and dreary. They don't want to see the presidency turned over to someone that they feel, rightly or wrongly, is not innovative, does not have spark, does not capture for them that secret sauce of what a president of the United States should represent. And thus, while I think everything Norm said is true, you need to know it's very hard for Joe Biden to walk away from where he is and not say, because he believes in his soul and everything he is, he would be better than she is.
Okay, on that note, we're going to have to bring this discussion to a close. I'm sure this debate is something we're going to be continuing in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول التصويت في الكونغرس على اتفاق إيران النووي، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.